All right, we are now joined by Brandon Vogel. We apologize for that. Thank you very much for working with our curveball. You've hit it out of the ballpark. Good morning.
Good morning. No problem at all.
Hey, so yesterday was nice. A little chat with the head coach. It seems like every day comes along and there's something positive about Nebraska from the outside. Joe Klatt doubled down yesterday. Phil Steele's got Nebraska ranked 33rd overall. And I don't want to read too much into body language of Rule yesterday talking about his team. There's the feel that I get, B. Vogues, that he's got a little bit of quiet confidence, and I need to see results like all of us, but he feels good about his team. Do you sense that? Or do you sense this, that he enjoys being the head football coach at Nebraska, and we haven't had somebody that gives that body language feeling out in a long time?
Wow, that's good. That's a really good way to put it. I think it's not to take a cop-out answer, but it's some of both.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if the latter, if I feel like the latter is true, which I do, it's hard to know how much of the former then how much stock to put into that. But my read is I think he knows Nebraska, if not for kind of a bizarre collection of events when you talk about the QB injuries and then the turnovers, which, it's not like Nebraska wasn't responsible for that stuff. It was, but it's a lot of randomness, a lot of stuff that's tough to control. The offense had just been a little bit better. We're talking this offseason about our Nebraska team that maybe goes 6-6 or maybe even 7-5. So that would be the starting point. And I think internally, like if you truth serum to Matt Rule, it might be where he views their starting point going into this 2024 season, which, then all of a sudden changes, I guess, some of these preseason projections. But here we are. We know where Nebraska is coming from in the real world. It's 5-7, haven't been to a bowl game since 2016. And Husker fans have been burned before. So it's going to be the summer of skepticism, I think. All well, kind of quietly, internally, being a little bit excited for what could be.
Brandon, this question was posed to me yesterday after Matt Rule spoke about made some comparisons to how people look at Ohio State when they get someone come through camp and then they offer, and then immediately, the star level spikes and they're not necessarily looked at as a developmental piece, but more of this guy's a big time prospect, as opposed to if Nebraska sees somebody they offer and it's chalked up to more of what Matt Rule and his staff are going to be known for. Someone was asking, is Matt Rule, is he comparing the different situations that they have because it frustrates him, or is it because that was set out of pride of what they do, how they identify talent, and more importantly, maybe how they're selling their, the recruits on what they're going to do when they get here?
Yeah, I took it as more of a pride thing of like, hey, it's good to be known as kind of the the person who's good at finding uncovered gems.
Mm-hmm.
But like, we don't look at it that way. Like, if we're offering a guy, we don't care what his other offers are. We think he's a future NFL player, is essentially how Matt Rule put it. And I think, like, this is something that'll prove out a little bit over time, because we've seen Nebraska in the past and they've done a good job with this cycle, with this group of coaches of, I think, when they identify those players, they offer them right away. And there's not a lot of times I can remember where it kind of moves up the chain, where it's like, oh, if Nebraska's on this guy, then all of a sudden, say Michigan, Wisconsin, some of these other schools are in. We've seen that happen in Nebraska in the past. I think it will continue to happen when Nebraska offers a guy to the future, because a lot of times they're picking a guy who, may have some MAC offers. They have a couple of equivalent offers, I would say. So it's just kind of where you are, I think, in the overall recruiting food chain in terms of what happens after
that. 1 second here. Somebody, John Hull just committed to Nebraska, a kicker. I just wanted to like Matt Rule tweeted something out of GBR staying home, and I'm like, Christian, no. So
what do we got?
So we have discussed this after watching the wide receivers, and I think Matt Rule, after last year, wanted to do Garrett McGuire a solid. Did not deliver him a great room from top to bottom, or a room that could withstand some injuries, and maybe it wasn't as good as it could have been. But the younger guys got better, and he went out and said, I'm going to help you with some older guys. We know that the wide receiver room probably has more depth since a couple of Bo's last years. But certain guys in that room, I want your assessment on what you think their 2024 will look like with competition in front of them. First, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, who got hurt early last year, and then also Malachi Coleman.
Yeah, so those are two good ones to start with. So I kind of look at this, everybody stays healthy in a vacuum. Banks is probably your leading receiver in terms of catches, maybe yards, so maybe not yards, because I think Nayor, best case scenario, becomes kind of your big play threat. And I think Nebraska has a couple of big play threats. So with those two in particular, I kind of see Garcia Castaneda maybe being a little more like Marcus Washington, when he was healthy last year, like could make you some plays downfield, but was pretty sure-handed. There were games where he had his number of receptions kind of crept up there. And then with Malachi, remains, big and athletic. He's a little bit in the Nayor category of, I think he's a guy you want to push the ball to downfield a couple of times a game just to see what happens. Because at that point, the quarterback factors into this too. It becomes, can your wide receiver win? And I think Malachi is a guy who's building towards that and can be that for them. So it gets pretty intriguing when you look at it, and when you fold tight end into this too, which we'll see how ready to go he is. Might include Carter Nelson. Nebraska is going to have a lot of options in the passing game.
The another part of yesterday's conversation, because we saw Jalen Gramstead become a product of this year, but with the different summer camps that are not necessarily for incoming freshmen too, but guys that either exist in junior college or are grad transfers, whatever it might be. It brought up James Williams again, and I feel like when we talk about this defensive line, that we forget how impactful he was in spells and being able to rotate and being able to provide depth there too. I don't think, Brandon, that needs to be the gold standard when it comes to this part of the year and being able to discover those types of guys. But I also feel like that's another good indication, going back to the question I asked you earlier about their ability to identify, but maybe more importantly, like James Williams, be able to develop as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and it's kind of, if you can use that time, this time of year, and so they've done it twice now in terms of these kind of graduate transfers, quote unquote. Williams is coming from junior college, of course,
right.
But if you can build that reputation of like, yeah, that's a camp you want to go to because you might get a shot. Mm-hmm. They've done it 2 years in a row now. Williams, is the guy you add in the summer, and it's like, okay, great. Here's what he did, and here's who he is, like what you can tell about him. And then he just works and ends up on the field. With Gramstead, like Nebraska's chance to kind of thread the needle here and get a little bit of help at quarterback with only 3 scholarship QBs and 2 of them being true freshmen. Like, I don't think they had a ton of options. Like, who in the portal's coming over here to do that? Right. Probably nobody. But you find a guy who's won a ton, who literally topped out at the level he was at. And I think the added benefit from that is, these guys, whether they get a scholarship or they come as a walk-on, like they almost by default have kind of a walk-on mindset of like, hey, I'm getting an opportunity that, you may not known was going to come. Certainly if you're, playing football at NAIA, maybe in junior college, it's a little bit different, but either way, I think you get guys who are going to work and who have proven themselves, which for me is like the biggest thing in the transfer portal, more so than whatever recruiting ranking a guy started out with.
Brandon Vogel joining us. You can follow his work at counterread.com. Brandon and Aaron Sorensen, some fantastic stuff up there as we lead into 10 Saturdays from the start of the season tomorrow. Another thing announced yesterday, because camp will be here before you know it, and there are some guys that miss spring that could factor heavily in rotations this upcoming fall. Turner Corcoran, Deshaun Singleton, Gabe Ervin. The Tan Man said, not Keith, the Tan Man said that if practice started today, they would be available to start. Of those three, knowing offensive line, defensive back, running back, which one was most encouraging to you to hear that they're good to go?
I would probably go Singleton, Corcoran, Irvin in terms of, I think, needs for Nebraska. I look at the secondary, and it's got Singleton's one of the three pillars I think you can put back there, along with Gifford, and probably Tommy Hill. You got the other corner spot. You got Hartzog, who could do that, but was playing a lot more nickel corner in the spring. So getting Singleton being healthy and picking up from where he left off is important. Corcoran, folds into like what this offensive line looks like, because he could play at multiple spots, and I kind of look at him as assuming Prohaska takes that left tackle spot and keeps it. It allows Nebraska to go beyond just kind of like the first five we could all name right now pretty easily. And then Irvin, he's been good in limited bits that we've been able to see him. It's just the health piece of it. So he was, those first couple of games, he was clearly the guy. So the trust level is there. You've just got a couple more other options that I think are closer to equal in the running back room.
I wondered this, and he kind of said this yesterday about Matt Rule periodically checking in with us. He said he really does like us, and he likes to give us content, which is always welcome. But this kind of goes back to what Gary asked. Does that come from, in your opinion, and he says intentionality? We know some of the things that he says intentionality when it comes to recruiting and getting the message out to recruits, getting that content out, that we're going to talk about it as well. But I get the feeling he does enjoy that part of it. And it's kind of to Gary's point, maybe that's just love of the job, or he just likes to communicate with the people that do cover this program because it's going to benefit in the long run. Is yesterday another example of that, in your opinion?
I think so. I mean, I can't remember the time, like, there were coaches who would talk to you in June,
right?
If you bumped into them at a camp, but like setting this up and being like, okay, and not just setting it up, but saying, this is it until media days, just so you know, for advanced planning, which is above and beyond for people in our spot. I think all of it's intentional. He talked about the camps as being not just a camp, but also a marketing opportunity. All of this media stuff is as well. I think the access that they allowed is intentional because, from our perspective, maybe this is too inside media baseball, but like it improves everyone's coverage to go and do a cooking demo, which a group of reporters did a couple of weeks ago, including Aaron Sorensen from my colleague at Counter Read. Is it something the fan base is hungry to hear about right now? Maybe not. But when it comes to like writing a story down the line about the nutrition program, like these people getting the opportunity to have the hands-on experience with it, I think makes things better. And it gives them a better understanding of the program, which provides better coverage, which is better for Nebraska fans. It's better for the media. And ultimately, it's better for the program.
A question that Nick posed a little bit ago that I want to circle back to, because you wrote about it earlier in the week. And if you are a Substack subscriber to Counter Read, it shows up at 6 a.m. in your inbox. It's perfect if you're up or you're just getting up, one of the first things you read. But you went into this thing about recruiting. And I guess until I read the article, I didn't realize that Nebraska had that many offers out for the class of 2026. I know they're being proactive. They work ahead. They just have gone through a run of camps where they have a lot of kids from a lot of different states that are on campus. So they're offering them scholarships. But as you broke down some of the offers, is there anything that stands out in what they're trying to pursue, or what catches their eyes for when they're building 25, 26, and 27, and even beyond in terms of their offers?
Yeah. So it took about 350 offers to land. the previous class, 24. And for 25, they're already at 250-ish, and then 150-ish for 2026. So I think that's kind of what it's going to take. And the tack I chose to take was looking at that by positions. Where are they spending the resource of time for their coaching staff? And it wasn't so much that, well, there were a couple things that stood out as maybe uniquely Nebraska. They're pretty heavy on the athletes, which I think, we've seen. And Nebraska will take a guy. They're like, yeah, you can run this fast or jump this high or whatever it may be. And we'll figure out where you fit. So that stood out. The other piece, I don't know, this is unique to Nebraska, but it struck me as the smart way to play it. They've really put a lot of chips at what I think are pretty key positions in terms of offensive tackle, wide receiver, corner, and then not so much edge rusher. That was kind of the one where I thought maybe there'd be more, but maybe you cover that up a little bit with the athletes or the linebacker offers, because they were a little bit heavier there. So that's kind of what jumped out to me. Those are the positions that are going to be the most competitive for players just nationally. They're the players that I think can really impact and raise a team's ceiling. If you're right at corner, tackle, wide receiver, et cetera, you have a chance to be pretty good, even if you don't recruit like Ohio State, Georgia, et cetera, across the board.
I don't want to make this more than what I think Gary and I agree it is, and it's a good story with Jalen Gramstead, but there's a section of fans that saw that news yesterday, and I saw this put out by a well-regarded member of the media yesterday, that maybe that addition allows Nebraska to be a little bit more loose with how they want to play Heinrich Haarberg. In your opinion, is Jalen Gramstead, is it more than just a good story? Is there something more to that addition to the quarterback room on how it can impact the rest of the quarterbacks there?
Yeah, I think it has the opportunity to be more than just a good story. I mean, I think he is a live option to, if Nebraska needs to go down the QB depth chart, which it needed to go to number 3 last year. Mm-hmm. He's probably in that mix based on his experience. The transition from NAIA to Big Ten football is going to be steep. So that'll be the key question. But it reminds me a lot of the situation at Illinois last year. They got a guy, John Paddock, who'd been a starter at Ball State, so a little bit different. But Illinois football was like his family lineage, and he went there to basically knowing he was probably going to be the backup. Ended up winning 2 games for him. I think that's the ceiling for a Gramstead potentially. I think that's why you bring him in. And it feels like a little bit of a luxury to get him, I believe. Does it allow them to use Haarberg a little bit more creatively? I hadn't thought of that angle, actually. But it could. Heinrich is athletic enough that, yeah, I can see the staff wanting to get him on the field instead of just, potentially having a headset and a different colored cap on the sideline.
Hey, thank you very much for adjusting with us. We always enjoy the conversation, and people want to know what's next. I mean, you're churning out some great stuff on content and angles. What's next for counterread.com?
Yeah, so I mentioned to you guys a couple of weeks ago, and I hadn't gotten to it yet, but I think we're finally going to hit on that running back room with the news of Gabe Ervin being ready to go and looking at what that looks like. A little teaser. I think Emmett Johnson may have done more than is immediately apparent last year. So work through that a little bit. How Ramir Johnson potentially fits in there. And then I'm actually excited to dig into Gramstead a little bit more as the weeks go on. So those 2 are high on my list for forthcoming newsletters.
Fantastic stuff. B. Vogues, have a great weekend.
You too, guys. Thanks a lot.
Counterread.com. Quick nugget.